Welcome back to the third installment of Ottober. I bet a lot of you are surprised that I'm able to keep pumping out videos purely about otters, but let me assure you, I can find a lot about otters to talk about for 9 to 10 minutes if I put my mind to it. Today's subject is going to cover a lot of history as we are going over the interactions between ourselves and our otterly amazing friends. So if you don't like history, tough it out. You might learn something that you didn't know beforehand. Also, why don't you like history? Sure, what is taught in schools is boring, but when you actually look into it for yourselves, you find a lot of interesting topics that are 1,000 times more riveting than learning about the same 7 events in US history over and over again. And with that, let's dive right into this. Now, otters have a long history with us humans, as has been stated in the past 2 videos that I've made for the month. Probably one of the easiest places to start on this little journey is in Africa, where our first interactions with otters would have occurred. While I couldn't find anything from the oldest cave painting sites that are definitively otters, there are some locations that have paintings of them that are a little more recent. But why would I go into that when I have something a little more solid? In Egypt, the mastaba of Meroruca depicts what are either mongoose or otter in hunting scenes on the Nile. It's debatable as to which it is, but what are no longer in question are those bronze statues. Dating back to the late period and the Ptolemaic times, they depict an otter with their hands raised to the sun. These statues are in association with the goddess Wadjet, and if you watch my first video for Ottober, you'll remember me mentioning this. This probably isn't what you were really expecting me to talk about when I mentioned history. And you would be correct, this is only the first page of my script, and I didn't bother to look to see where I stopped. Maybe you were probably expecting something more along the lines of this. Otters have been used as fishing partners in Asia for centuries. If you're familiar with cormorants and other fishing birds and how they're used, it's the same thing. Another comparison would be like hunting dogs. Speaking of hunting dogs, we clearly can't talk about the interactions of humans and otters without talking about that. No, I'm not talking about otter hounds. Well, technically I am. Sport hunting has been a popular pastime of European nobility ever since there was European nobility. Now, I'm not here to knock hunting in general. It's an important and in some cases necessary way to put food on the table for a lot of people around the world. But sport hunting has quite a few negative repercussions, and that's what I'm taking issue with. Sport hunting for otters can be found as far back as the 1300s, and much like many other forms of sport hunting that utilize dogs, we get this, guys. There. That's all I'm going to dedicate to them. If you remember the first video I did for Ottober, I may have mentioned that sea otters have the densest fur of all mammals. The reason for this is that they don't have any blubber to help keep them warm, so they rely on their fur to keep them warm in the cold waters of the Pacific Ocean they live in. Why did I make a sudden change in what I was talking about? Oh, you know, reasons. The fur trade started in the 1600s. Europeans and Russians would trade goods with the indigenous people of the Americas for furs, which they would send back to their home countries to be processed and turned into high-end clothing. Sea otter furs were amongst the most sought out of furs because in addition to being the warmest due to their high density, they were also water resistant. By the late 1700s, Russian fur traders had established a number of colonies along the coast of Alaska and were actively traveling as far south as California to hunt sea otters, as they became far more scarce in the areas near them. An unfortunate casualty of the fur trade was the Steller sea cow, which the Russian hunters would use as a source of food, and they were hunted into extinction. Eventually, the Russian colonies in Alaska were no longer profitable in the fur trade due to the vast majority of the sea otter population being hunted out of existence. America would capitalize on this and end up buying the state in 1867 for $7.2 million, or roughly 2 cents per acre. The hunting of sea otters continued up until 1911, when the North Pacific Fur Seal Convention took place and limited the hunting of fur seals and sea otters. This treaty would serve as the framework for future national and international treaties for the conservation of animals, including the Marine Mammal Protection Act of 1972, which prohibited the taking and harassment of marine mammals. In 1915, there was only one colony of sea otters south of Alaska, a single raft of 32 otters. Raft is the term used for multiple sea otters, if you weren't aware. Anyways, every sea otter on the Pacific coast of America can trace its lineage back to this one group, and all the sea otters in the world can be tracked back to just a total of 13 groups from when conservation efforts started. The sea otter is considered one of the crowning achievements of conservation efforts, but it still took a while for the rest of the otters to have some form of protection on them. In England, the Eurasian otter wasn't placed on the list of protected species until 1978. Funnily enough, it was the hunters themselves that noticed the declining numbers of otters and pushed for the conservation of them while voluntarily ending the tradition before any regulations were put into place. It's around this time that we start to see every species move onto the endangered species list and have protections placed on them. Broadly speaking, the conservation of otters has been a success. The North American river otter is back to a point where it's no longer a protected species and has been found to be taking back much of its original territory. I know I didn't talk very much about them throughout the video, but they suffered much of the same issue as sea otters. Although their numbers were always larger, they were much harder to find than their fully aquatic cousins. But this success wasn't shared by every species of otter. The Japanese otter faced a number of issues in its interactions with humans. While its numbers had been reduced by the fur trade, that isn't the largest issue that it faced. Japan is a nation that grows rapidly and has very little land to do so with, so it's not hard to imagine that habitat loss, pollution, and urban development were the key reasons for the downfall of this otter species. The last official sighting of the Japanese otter was in 1979, and on August 28, 2012, the Japanese otter was officially declared extinct, taking the number of otter species from 14 to 13. Habitat loss is currently the largest issue that otters are facing in the modern era, be it from the effects of climate change, urban development, or any other number of ways in which we end up as responsible for the loss of their homes. But it's not the only issue. While hunting is no longer a major issue, poaching still is. Most countries have a ban in some form or fashion on to owning otters as pets, but that doesn't stop them from ending up in the pet trade illegally. Once again, I am not knocking on the pet trade as a whole, but it does leave a lot to be desired. We tend to focus on things like puppy mills and the harsh conditions that are very real and present in the industry, but we don't normally think about the species that aren't bred in captivity. There's a lot of species of fish, reptiles, and mammals that are exclusively brought in from wild capture. If this process was limited to breeding programs and actually had regulations to it that were followed, then it wouldn't be a problem. But that's just not the case. It's mostly the Asian small-clawed otter that ends up in the pet trade. Being the smallest otter, they are often more desired since they're roughly the same size as cats. The problem here is that they are a protected species in most of their native range and are illegal to capture and to export. Between 2016 and 2017, at least 711 were offered illegally through online sales in Southeast Asia, and in 2018, there were 49 confiscated from the illegal pet trade. Most of them were bound to Japan. Talking about the negative impacts of humanity on our planet and animal species isn't necessarily the most perky of topics, but it is an important conversation to have. The more we know about what we've done, the more likely people are to actually want to do something about it. And while it might be a dirty tactic, I haven't seen many people who can say no to a cute mascot for a cause. And what better to use than the cute and adorable sea otter? Well, hey, thanks for watching the video this far in. If you enjoyed my content and the way that I presented all this information, please give me a like, have a comment down in the video, and hit that subscribe button. It really helps me out. Anyways, still got 2 more videos to make within the month of October. And so, till next time.